All right, good morning, everyone. So today we are starting a new chapter. We're moving into chapter 22, which is titled The Role of Political Parties. I know in the past I've had you write the notes down. You're in luck. I will not be having you write these notes down. You can just take the notes directly from the uh, presentation that I've shared with you guys separately. So you're in luck today. But just know that anything I talk about on here could be um, could be is fair game for any potential assessment or quiz of that kind. Okay. I have also shared with you guys some vocab terms from this chapter on Quizlet, so please make sure you study those because I will be quizzing you guys on that as well. All right. So the objectives for this chapter, the two things we're going to be taught, or at least this chapter and section. The objective is we're going to learn how political parties help the government and also how political parties help individual citizens. Okay. So in general, let's just kind of recap stuff we've talked about in the past. People want things from the government. Okay. In general, that's we expect, not just want, but we expect things from the government. If you think all the way back to the beginning of the year, we talked about the idea of why we have governments. We talked about the rule of law, the idea that, laws should be created in order to help guide human beings and human civilization. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about this stuff today as far as our rights go. So what do we want from our government? Okay, so we want our rights to be protected. Okay, those inalienable or unalienable rights, as they are mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. We want those rights to be protected: life, liberty, and property. We also want protection from, poverty and unemployment. Our government has programs set up within the government itself to help people who are impoverished, okay, who are poor, who are homeless, or people who have lost jobs, kind of like what's going on right now with COVID-19. People have been laid off, people have lost their jobs. Those people are eligible to collect full-time or part-time unemployment if they wish. And that unemployment is pretty much a weekly check that comes in to help you out, to help you get through these tough times. So the government is there to do that for you. We also want fair treatment in places like businesses, at work, in the courts. So in general, each business that operates in this country has to abide or has to follow certain laws and rules in order to be a legal operating business. Okay. We also want fair treatment when we go to trial. Again, the whole idea of due process. We want the right to a lawyer. We want the right to a jury and a speedy trial. All of those things have to do with what we want from our government. We want a clean environment. Okay. We want to be able to go outside and not get cancer from the smog and the pollution. So, the government does work in terms of keeping the environment as clean as possible. They don't always do a good job with that, but that is part of what we want. We also want education. Okay, we are legally obligated to have education of some kind, and also things like product safety. Like when you build a house, for example, you can't just go around building houses any which way you want. There are certain regulations, building codes that you must abide by, that you must follow in order to properly build that home. And this kind of goes back to something we discussed again a while ago, the social contract. So the social contract, if you don't remember, is the idea that, we give up some of our rights, some of our free will to the government. And in exchange for giving up some of that free will, we are granted services and the protection of those unalienable or inalienable, they both mean the same thing, those rights, life, liberty, and property that we are guaranteed. Okay, so when you think about it in general, alone, individually, we don't have lots of power. We may feel powerless at times. We may feel like our wants and our needs or our ideas are not really known. However, acting together, we are much stronger. And I think that kind of goes without saying. That's common sense. Groups of people are much stronger than individual people in most cases. However, our democracy, our government, was not originally set up to have major political parties. Okay, we're going to talk about something called the George Washington farewell address at some point, probably next week. And we'll talk about how George Washington, one of the things he said when he left office, he served 2 terms as president early on. He was our first president. He warned us against having political parties. Clearly, we didn't listen. He also warned us about other things as well, but we'll get to that another time. So on a larger scale, people form groups called, in order to get their thoughts and ideas out there. So obviously, individually, again, like I said, we don't have a lot of say by ourselves. Now, if you're a super popular celebrity like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, or a professional athlete like LeBron James, or someone like, the Kardashians, Kim Kardashian. Obviously, individually, if you're one of those people, you have plenty of influence. And we all know that because we all know who they are. And they are obviously very rich, very powerful, very influential. Unfortunately, not all of us are going to be Kim Kardashians, LeBron James, Dwayne The Rock Johnsons. Hopefully, a lot of you guys are. But in general, that's not going to happen for all of us. So how do we as individuals get our voice out there when it comes to the government? So on a larger scale, people form groups called political parties in order to influence the government. Again, the idea of influencing is to get the government to do what you want it to do. So the definition here, so anything that you see in yellow is a definition of a term that we're going to be seeing later in Quizlet. A political party is an organization of citizens who wish to influence and control the government by getting their members elected to office. Okay? So in general, party members share similar ideas about what they want the government to do. So if you're part of the Democratic Party, you believe in certain things. If you're part of the Republican Party, you believe in certain things. Those are our 2 parties. We have a 2-party system in this country, which is very rare when you talk about globally how countries run their governments. If a party can put enough of its members in office, that party can have a major effect on the policies of the government. So before we move on, think back to something that we talked about when the Constitution was being drafted. We talked about 2 groups of people. We talked about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And the main difference between those 2 groups, which were pretty much like that was the birth of political parties. They didn't call them political parties at the time, but that's pretty much what they were. If you remember, the Feds and anti-Feds believed in 2 different things. The Federalists wanted a strong national government, whereas the anti-Federalists did not want a strong national government. They just didn't want the government to have as much power. So right there, we see there's a major difference between those 2 groups. And that's kind of how like the Democrats and Republicans are today. There are major differences between the 2 political parties that run our government. Okay, so in general, the political parties of our government, the 2 main ones, because that's really all there are. There are smaller political parties, and we'll talk more about those another time. But how do political parties help the government? Like, what purpose do they serve that actually helps us? So there are 4 functions that they serve, or 4 purposes that they serve. So the first one is that political parties select candidates for many public offices at all levels of government, local, state, and national. So when you're talking about local, state, and national, the different levels of our government, the national level, obviously you think of the president, you think of, obviously, the president is the, I was trying to think of something bigger than the president, and you can't, because in the national government, the president is at the top of it. State level, you have senators, okay, you have governors, you have congressmen that are elected to the national level, but start out at the state level. Okay. And you also have the local level as well. So when we talk about local, like Cranston, for example, has a city council. Where I'm from in Coventry, we're not a city, but we have a town council. Okay. We also have mayors that run certain cities as well and towns. So at all different levels, political parties have an effect. Okay. So people in the local, state, and national level all have a link to political parties in some way. Okay. Also, these political parties set goals for the government. Okay. So if a political party is in power in the government and they have more influence than the other, they can push forward their plans to achieve certain goals for the government. Okay. How they see fit. They also provide leadership to reach those goals. Okay, they appoint people, they nominate people to get elected to make sure those goals actually happen or they're actually achieved. And they also serve the function of keeping an eye on everyone else and keeping an eye on the other party to make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. We call that the watchdogs, pretty much, and we'll talk about that later. All right, so selecting candidates, pretty straightforward. Political parties nominate or name candidates to run for office. In general, here's an example. When some of you ran for student council, you weren't nominated. You just put your name on a ballot, and then if enough people voted for you, then you won a position in the student council. Doesn't work like that in regular politics. In general, political parties nominate, or name candidates to run for office. Parties take responsibility usually for finding and nominating qualified candidates. So in general, what they'll do is they'll seek out people who they feel are qualified to represent their party. It could be a town council person. It could be a city manager. It could be a senator. It could be a governor of some kind. Okay. If they feel that person can really help their party, and they may not even be in a elected position. They may be somebody who is just very popular amongst people, and they may reach out to that person and say, hey, we would like you to run for this position and be involved in politics as it relates to our political party. In general, there are about 500,000 elected positions in all levels of government. Again, the levels of government, we have the national, state, and local levels of government. So between those three levels, there are, around 500,000 people who are elected to those positions. Some, very few, really, are nonpartisan. So that means that candidates do not declare themselves to be members of a particular party. So they're not running, or they're not in that position on behalf of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So an example would be school board members. Okay, so each district has their own school board. So Cranston, we have a Cranston school board, and they make decisions for the schools. They, about resources for the schools to make sure that there are the correct, they hire people, they help hire people to be part of school districts. They don't really represent the political parties very much, but in most offices, we would call that partisan, meaning that most offices have candidates that run as members of a party. Okay, so in general, if you're partisan, it means that you are part of a party. Okay, so you can be Democratic or Republican. All right, setting goals. Another thing that these political parties do is that they establish positions on issues and set goals for the government. Okay, so each party has its own way of thinking. And just like you guys have opinions and positions on different topics, the Democratic and the Republican parties all have different positions on different topics. So each party has something that we call a platform. Now, this is not a physical platform. It's more of a metaphorical platform, which is pretty much a statement of the party's official stance on major public issues. So again, when you think of platform, you guys think of like a big wooden stage, like where someone stands and gives a speech. Well, a platform in this case is just a statement of the party's official stance on healthcare, on guns, on abortion, on marriage, on education. Okay, these are all major public topics or public issues. So each party will have a platform or a statement on all of these different issues. Now, in order to build a platform, you need planks. Again, we're not talking about real planks of wood. We're talking about metaphorical planks. So each platform is made up of planks. Planks are position statements on each specific issue in the platform. So if there's a platform that has to do with education, so that education platform is made up of many different planks, and those planks are different statements that speak to the position of that party when it comes to education. So Democrats have one way of looking at education. So their platform on education is made up of different statements from the Democratic Party and different ideas from the Democratic Party that make up that platform. Okay? So in general, the goal is to get a candidate elected so that they can turn the planks, again, these metaphorical pieces of wood that build a platform, so they can get these planks and turn them into actual policies that we as people of the government have to follow. And just to show you guys a few things, a couple pictures. So on the left here, we have the different, not all of them, but several of the top party platforms for both the Democratic and Republican parties. So you can take a look through those at your leisure. So again, there's immigration, there's LGBT rights, there are voting rights, healthcare. All of these are different major public issues that, depending on the party, they're going to have a different opinion and different view of that issue. So the way that Democrats think about immigration or education is not the same way that Republicans think about immigration or education. Okay. On the right over here, we have, these are from the last two Democratic and Republican national conventions. Okay. So this is the Republican National Convention, which took place in Cleveland. And this is the 2016 Democratic Convention. I believe it took place in Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken. I could be totally wrong. I'm just guessing because it has Liberty Bell here. I'm assuming it's Philadelphia. I'd be lying if I said I remember exactly where it was. But pretty much at these two conventions, several things happen. First, there is representation, okay, from each state that travels to these conventions. And depending on the state that you're from, your number of participants traveling to these conventions from each state are going to vary. So for example, like the people coming from Rhode Island or Delaware, two very small states, two smallest states really, their numbers of people are going to be much different than like the people that Texas would send, or Florida would send, or California would send to these conventions, because it's based on the state's population. So what they do is they set goals for each party, and they also not usually, when they meet every 4 years, they officially select or nominate the candidate that is going to represent that party in the upcoming presidential election. Now, how that's going to operate this year is beyond me. It's probably going to be very, very weird because the presidential election must go on. So I'm very curious how these national conventions are going to take place later in the summer, because they were scheduled to happen later in the summer. But I'm not really sure how they're going to do that now. So we'll wait and see. Okay, the third part is providing leadership. So leadership is necessary to make the laws and carry out programs that citizens want. So each party, Democrats, Republicans, each party selects leaders. So in this case, the party members in Congress select majority and minority floor leaders and whips to provide leadership in making laws. So in general, if you just got a bunch of people in a room together and you did not assign anyone to be the leader, kind of like how I assign group leaders to whenever we do group work, I don't necessarily want that person to like run the show for everyone, but it's nice to have one person at least to keep people organized, to keep people in line. So in that same idea goes with Congress. So they will select majority and minority floor leaders and whips to make sure people are sticking to what they're supposed to be doing. So the whip, I know it sounds funny, but they literally whip, not literally whip, but in a way they sort of, keep people in line and make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. When it comes to creating laws, they speed up the process so the process of passing laws is long enough. So they speed the process up to make sure that each party can get their laws passed. The parties work this way in state legislators too. So the same things that are happening in Congress also happen with the Rhode Island General Assembly. That's like Rhode Island's version of Congress, pretty much. And that's where our laws are created for our state. The executive branch, again, that's where the president resides. The political party of the president in power is known as the party in office. So if you are President Trump, that means you are a Republican, which means that the Republican Party is the party in office currently. Okay. When President Barack Obama was in power, he was Democratic. So the Democratic Party, when he was president, was the party in office or in power at the time. And the president will normally appoint loyal party members to high government posts. And that makes, that's pretty much common sense. So if I'm Trump, I'm not going to appoint people from the Democratic Party, people that probably don't like me and are not going to support what I want to do, support my policies, support my legislation. I want to put people in those positions that are going to back me up. I want people that are going to support me and support the way I think. And the last part we're going to talk about today is the act of watchdogs. So in general, after an election, okay, so when President Trump was elected, that means the Republican Party became the party in office, which means the Democratic Party was not the party in office. So it was the job and role of the Democratic Party, in this case, the party that was not in power, to make sure that the public knows when the party in power is not living up to its promises. So both parties do this. So if the Democratic Party is in power, the Republican Party does whatever it can to make sure that everyone knows if the Democratic Party slips up, and vice versa. Okay, so I feel like this day and age, that this stuff gets very aggressive. It also gets very hostile when people talk about things going on in individual parties, or when people reach out to another party and say, hey, you didn't do this and you didn't do that. You said you were going to do this. You said you were going to reform education. You said you were going to reform immigration this way, and you didn't. So we're going to make sure everyone knows about it. So why do they do that? Well, obviously they want people to know when the rival party, the other party, messes up. So maybe the next time an election rolls around, they'll think twice about voting for people for that particular party, and maybe they'll vote for their political party instead. So parties in general keep tabs on the behavior of members of other parties, and they're very eager, like I said, to report any wrongdoing. They're going to tweet it. They're going to post it on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, on the news, Fox News, BBC, MSNBC, CNN, all these different news stations. They're going to be very quick to post any wrongdoings of the other party. Okay? And in general, this watchdog function of the parties makes sure that members of the party in power are honest and hardworking. That's not always the case, but that is the intention. Okay, so that's that for this part. The next time I talk to you guys will be the second half of this presentation, but I'll stop it there and I'll talk to you guys later.